The air in the hospital corridor tasted like antiseptic and anxiety. Under the sterile, blinding lights, a young man's hand trembled as it hovered over a document that promised one life for another. He was 17. His name was Jalen, and he was about to sign away a piece of himself for a stranger. Tripods stood like skeletal sentinels. Microphones crowded in, hungry for his first words. Flash units charged, ready to immortalize his sacrifice. "Give us a smile, son," a voice called from behind a lens. Jalen forced his lips to curve. His palms were damp, the pen slick in his grip. The paper seemed to swim under the heat of the lights. A woman in a sharp suit and pearls watched from periphery. A cell phone pressed to her ear. "He's perfect," she murmured. "Mrs. Vance is watching from the donor lounge. Keep it moving." Behind her, a vinyl banner stretched across the wall, its cursive script proclaiming, "Miracles happen here." Jalen didn't see the hollow echo in those words. He believed them. He thought this was about mercy. On the exclusive upper floor, a Titan's air was fading, his body rejecting itself. Jalen's kidney was a final, desperate match. To get here, Jalen had spent his last $12. Bus fare, a vending machine sandwich, a single quarter left in his threadbare pocket. Now, he was giving something no money could ever buy. He didn't hear the low chuckle between two men in expensive suits near the elevators. "The optics are pristine," one said. "A photo op angel from the inner city. Schedule the swap for 7 a.m. The cameras kept firing, capturing what looked like a modern-day saint. But the truth, that they never intended for Jalen to actually go on the knife, was a narrative buried before the first flash. This is where darkness was a mask of light. This is where compassion is currency and trust is a weapon. If you believe in justice that fights from the shadows, stay with us. He came to save a life. They came to write a headline. The constant rhythmic whir of dialysis machine had been the soundtrack of Jalen's entire life. In their cramped studio apartment, it was a mechanical heartbeat, a fragile assurance that his mother was still breathing. Most nights, Denise slept propped in a worn recliner because the sofa's broken spring stabbed her back. The walls thrummed with vibration from the laundromat below, and the flickering street lamp outside cast a sickly, pulsing glow. But Jalen had a gift. He could make the spare feel like a home. Every morning before dawn, he'd rise in silence, rinse the single coffee mug, and check the machine's readouts. Pressure's holding. He'd whisper into the quiet, "You're okay, Ma." Denise would stir, a frail smile breaking through her exhaustion. "You fuss more than the ICU nurses." He'd grin. "They don't pay me enough to quit." After school, he'd run to the detail shop on 104th, washing and waxing luxury cars until his arms ached and his knuckles bled. Evenings were for tutoring the neighborhood kids around the kitchen table, trading patience for a few crumpled dollars. "Professor J," little Sean would shout after a correct answer. Jalen would laugh, a real one. "It's Dr. Jalen once I get through school." But in the quiet moments, he felt that dream slipping away, grain by grain, every time a medical bill arrived. Then the doctor used words that turned his world to ash. Transplant list, average weight, 5 to 7 years. 7 years. His mother didn't have 7 months. That night, as he sterilized the machine's filters, his phone glowed with a news alert. Billionaire tech mogul makes public plea. Donor needed to save son. A photo filled the screen. A boy, pale and surrounded by wires. A mother with eyes of carved ice. The article scrolled. They'd exhausted all options. The required blood type was O positive. So was Jalen's. He stared at the water-stained ceiling for an hour, the hum of the machine a dirge. Then, into the heavy dark, he whispered, "If someone gave Ma a kidney, they'd be a hero." By sunrise, he was at the public library, filling out the donor form on a sticky keyboard computer. The questions felt like judgments. Age, income, education. He typed detail shop assistant and hit submit. 3 days later, a polished voice on the phone said, "St. Vincent's Memorial. We're calling regarding your application for the Vance family." He went cold. "To the Billionaire?" "Yes," the voice chirped. "You're a match. They'd like to meet you." His mother wept. "Jalen, You can't give pieces of yourself away. He held her thin hand. It's one organ, Ma, but it's a whole life. He didn't know yet. That decision, born of pure love, was his ticket into a world where love was just a line item. Subscribe to LostBlack for stories where the human spirit fights back in the dark. The Vance estate wasn't a home. It was a monument. The front gate, wrought iron and towering, bore a polished V that gleamed like a knife. The air smelled of cut grass and imported blossoms, a world away from the scent of bleach and fried food that clung to Jalen's clothes. A silent driver led him down a marble hallway, so vast his sneakers squeaked in the emptiness. It was a silence with weight, a silence that cost money. Everything was polished, pristine, and painfully cold. Art hung on walls like imprisoned beauty. A chandelier dripped crystalline light. But beneath the splendor, Jalen felt a vibration, not of wealth, but of watchfulness. "Wait here," the driver said, gesturing to a sitting room. Jalen perched on the edge of a sofa that probably cost more than a year of his mother's treatments. A voice, cool and smooth, floated from the upper floor. "Is he here? The donor?" When she descended, Victoria Vance looked less like a person and more like a sculpture. A cream-colored pantsuit, diamonds at her wrists, hair in a perfect, frozen wave. She didn't offer a hand. Her eyes swept over him, then landed on the nurse's clipboard. "He's young. 17, the nurse confirmed, and a perfect tissue match." Mrs. Vance's mouth made a shape that wasn't a smile. Providence works in curious ways. She turned her gaze fully on Jalen. "You understand the gravity? My son's survival rests with you. You will follow every instruction to the letter." "Yes, ma'am," Jalen said, his voice soft. "I just want to help." A flicker in her eyes, something between amusement and disdain. "That's commendable." But she made commendable sound like foolish. A butler appeared with a tray. Sparkling water for her, tap water for him. She took a sip. "Your family, they support this. My mom knows. She's sick too. I figured if I could save someone else's kid." "That's enough," she cut him off, a faint wave of her hand. "Your sentiment is noted." The nurse leaned in, whispering, "He hasn't approved the media release." Mrs. Vance's eyes sharpened. Public awareness inspires others to give. It's for the greater good. Jalen shifted. "You mean my picture would be in the news?" "Of course," she said, the smile returning, brittle and bright. "You'll be the face of modern generosity, the boy from the projects who saved the prince." It was framed as praise, but it settled in his gut like a stone. Later, when the photographers arrived, she placed a cold, manicured hand on his shoulder. Her smile blazed with flashes, then vanished the instant the lights died. Behind her, aides murmured about brand alignment and narrative control. Catching his reflection in a gilded mirror, Jalen saw a stranger, small, swallowed by the grandeur. He thought he was offering hope. They were crafting a campaign. As he signed the final consent form, the family's lawyer turned to an assistant, his back to Jalen. "Once the press cycle is over, we activate the private donor. This one's for show." Jalen's pen froze. "For show?" He looked up, but the assistant just offered a plastic smile. "All standard, sweetheart. We're taking care of everything." For the first time, a splinter of doubt wedged itself into his heart. Whose life was he really saving? And whose story was he being written into? The night before the scheduled surgery, Jalen lay on a stiff hospital cot, the city's skyline a distant tapestry of false promises. He wasn't scared of the scalpel. He was buoyed by hope. He imagined the Vance boy waking up, healthy. He dreamed foolishly that such a powerful family might extend a hand to his mother afterward. He didn't want riches. He wanted a chance. But as midnight approached, the cracks began to show. A nurse entered, her smile too wide, too fast. "Just a last file verification, honey." He watched as she slid one form out of his folder and replaced it with another. When he asked, she said, "Routine." But as she turned, he caught the header on the discarded sheet. "Donor reassignment. Urgent." His blood went cold. He fumbled for the phone, number Mrs. Vance had given him. It rang once, then went to full voicemail. Down the hall, through a pane of frosted glass. He heard the murmur of a celebrati N. He edged to the door, peering through a slim gap. Victoria Vance stood in a cluster of suits and gowns, a flute of champagne in her hand. "The coverage is exceeding projections," a man said. "The humble hero angle is pure gold." "Perfect," Mrs. Vance replied, her voice clear. "As long as Elias gets his kidney, the narrative is secondary." The glass in her hand caught the light as she raised it. To optics, a terrible understanding, cold and sharp, pierced Jalen's chest. This wasn't a medical wing. It was a soundstage. He wasn't a donor. He was a prop. He backed away, heart hammering against his ribs, just as two broad-shouldered men in security uniforms rounded the corner and filled his doorway. "Hospital protocol," the first guard said, his voice a low rumble. He blocked the doorway entirely. "No outside communication pre-op. For your safety." Jalen's throat tightened. "I need to make one call. To my mother." The second guard placed a heavy, paternal hand on his shoulder. The grip was firm, final. "Relax, kid. You're doing a noble thing. Don't overthink it." The touch was comforting. It was a cage. He was escorted back to his room, the door clicking shut with sound of absolute finality. The night stretched, endless and silent. Jalen sat on the edge of bed, every instinct screaming. He was a pawn on a chessboard he never agreed to play on, dressed in the gown of a hero for a role that ended at the operating room doors. Morning arrived with a barrage of artificial light. The media swarm had reconvened. Thicker now. Victoria Vance appeared at his side, her hand a cold, firm pressure on his back, steering him toward the bank of cameras. "This young man's selfless heart," she announced, her voice trembling with practiced emotion, "restores my faith in humanity." The flashes erupted. She beamed. The moment the last red recording light winked off, her smile vanished. She leaned into his ear, her whisper like dry ice. "You'll be remembered forever. Don't make this difficult." Her perfume was suffocating. "Make this difficult." The words echoed in his skull. When the orderly arrived with the wheelchair, Jalen's entire body went rigid. The man's smile was vacant. Time to be a hero, pal. The journey down the hall felt like a procession to an altar. Jalen's eyes, sharpened by a lifetime of reading dangerous streets, scanned everything. At the intersection to the surgical wing, he glanced through a glass partition into a pre-op room. An older man lay on a gurney, pale and intubated. A nurse checked a chart at the foot of the bed. Jalen's gaze locked on the nameplate. It wasn't his. It read, "Donor, R. Coleman, Private." Ice flooded his veins. "Wait," Jalen croaked. "Try and stand." "That's not me." The orderly's grip on the wheelchair handles tightened. "Just nerves. Everything's fine. Stop." Jalen's voice tore through the hallway, raw and loud. "That's not my name. Look at the chart." Chalices a spark to dry tinder. Nurses turned. A monitor beeped an alarm. Voices rose, shouting orders to one another. "Sedate him. Get him out of the hall." In the confusion of scrambling bodies and raised voices, a strong hand clamped over his mouth from behind, a sharp pinch in his neck. Cold fire spread through his muscle. The world tilted, blurred, and faded to a muffled black. He woke to darkness and the smell of industrial cleaner. Pain bloomed at the injection site on his neck. His mind fought through a thick, chemical haze. He wasn't in a recovery room. His hand fumbled at his side. No bandages, no fresh incision. Just the rough fabric of his own gown. A dim, flickering fluorescent bar illuminated stacks of boxes. Gauze saline sterile sleeves. A supply closet. The dose hadn't been enough. He'd thrashed, ripped the four free. Pure adrenaline was burning off his sedation. He pushed himself up against a wall of paper towels, head swimming. The echoes of the struggle came back, shouts, his own scream. Then nothing. Footsteps approached outside. Two voices muffled by the door. Kid panicked during transfer. Saw the other donor. "Vance wanted quiet. She's handling the press. Tell them he got scared, backed out last minute. Donor anxiety." And the Coleman procedure? Already in progress. Keep the wing clear. Jalen stopped breathing. Backed out. They were erasing him from their story before the ink was dry. He crawled to the door, peering through the slim crack of light at the hinge. Across the hall, through another window, he saw a team wheeling a shrouded figure into an oar. The right age, the right size. A nurse followed, holding a familiar clipboard. The cover sheet, Coleman R. Private. Priority. A concierge donor. Paid. Expedited. His match was a coincidence they'd exploited for a publicity stunt. A bitter, metallic taste filled his mouth. The ache in his chest wasn't surgical. It was a fracture of a fundamental trust. They hadn't wanted his kidney. They wanted his story, his face, his poverty as a backdrop for their magnanimity. And then they'd wanted him to disappear. He was the decoy. From down the hall, a wave of polite applause filtered through the walls. The press conference. His own obituary, playing live. Moving on instinct, body aching, Jalen slipped out of the closet and limped toward the sound. The hospital atrium had been transformed into a studio. Lights blazed on a temporary stage where a podium stood draped in the Vance Foundation logo. A large screen displayed a single, powerful photo, Jalen, from the first photo shoot, looking hopeful and nervous. The caption beneath it stole the air from his lungs. In loving memory, a hero's sacrifice. Victoria Vance was at the microphone, a single, perfect tear tracing her cheek. "Our family has been touched by an angel," she said, her voice breaking on cue. "A young man who gave the ultimate gift so that my son might live." She placed a hand over her heart. Though a tragic complication took him from us, his spirit of generosity will live forever. The crowd, reporters, foundation staff, sympathetic donors, respond to a murmur of shared grief. And there, seated in the front row beside an empty chair, was Elias Vance, pale, wrapped in a blanket, but alive. Awake, he nodded weakly as his mother spoke, his eyes on the floor. Jalen stood frozen at the back of the room, shielded by a potted ficus, his hospital gown hidden under a janitor's coat he grabbed from a cart. They had killed him on paper. They had buried him under a mountain of lies and were now blessing the grave. A hot surge of nausea rose in his throat. Security sweep on the donor wing complete. A walkie-talkie crackled near him. Ensure the subject is contained or off-site. He was a ghost in his own life. To storm the stage now would be madness. They'd have him dragged away as an imposter, a traumatized lookalike, a liar. The truth was a fragile thing against their manufactured reality. He watched as Victoria Vance finished to a somber round of applause, hugging her son. She whispered into Elias's ear. The boy glanced up, his eyes wide with something that looked like confusion, then slowly nodded again. The empire of lies was complete, and Jalen, the inconvenient truth, had been edited out of the final cut. As the crowd began to disperse, a cold resolve hardened within him, crystallizing from the pain. If they had buried him, he would dig himself out, not with a shovel, but with a spotlight. 3 days later, the annual Vance Foundation Gala Hope was the social event of the season, a ballroom of crystal and hypocrisy. The air thrummed with money and self-congratulation. On the massive screen behind the stage, a tribute video played, a montage of Jalen's smiling face, shots of the inner city, soaring music. A narrator's baritone boomed, reminding us that in our divided world, compassion still bridges the gap. Victoria Vance, in a gown worth more than a transplant, dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Elias stood beside her, a living prop. The audience was a sea of black tie and tears, moved by the story they'd been sold. Jalen watched from the service entrance, his heart a drum against his ribs. He wore dark clothes, a hood pulled low. No one looked at the help. No one saw the ghost walking among them. He waited. His moment wasn't in the shadows. It was in the blinding light. The orchestra swelled for the climax. Victoria lifted a flute of champagne, her voice echoing through the hall. "Let us raise a glass," she proclaimed, to Jalen, the boy who gave everything. The room lifted their glasses. To Jalen. Silence hung for a beat, pregnant and false. Then, a voice cut through the reverent quiet, clear and steady from the back of the ballroom. "Everything," it said, "except my life." A ripple of confusion, 800 heads turned. Victoria Vance froze, her glass suspended. For a second, it was so quiet you could hear the ice melt. Jalen pushed back his hood and stepped into the aisle, into the path of a spotlight. You told the world I was dead. He pointed at the screen, at his own memorialized face. You sold my courage before I even had a chance to show it. Gasps cut the air. Cameras, previously trained on the stage, swung toward him like predators locking on. Phones were raised, red recording dots igniting like a swarm of angry stars. Victoria's composure cracked. A fissure of pure panic showed beneath the veneer. "Security!" she hissed, but her voice was lost in the rising buzz. Jalen kept walking down the aisle, his eyes locked on hers. "I gave you my last $12 of faith, and you tried to purchase my silence with it." He turned to Elias, whose face had gone ashen. Did you know your life was supposed to cost mine?" The boy's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked from Jalen to his mother, his eyes pleading. "Mom, Elias, don't." Victoria snapped, her voice brittle. "Say it." Jalen's command echoed. He was no longer a scared boy from the projects. He was a reckoning. Tell him the truth. Tell all of them. The ballroom was a hell breath. Every lens, every eye was a pendulum swinging between the billionaire matriarch and the boy she declared deceased. The silence was a physical weight. Then, from the press pit, a voice shouted, "We have the footage. Play it." The giant screens flickered. The tribute video dissolved into grainy black and white hospital security footage. There was Jalen, in his gown, being restrained by two orderlies. There was a hurried wheel of a different gurney into an oar, and clear, unmistakable audio, picked up by a hallway microphone. Victoria Vance's voice, cold and clinical. "Handle it quietly. The narrative is set." The crowd erupted. A wave of shock, outrage, and deafening noise crashed through the room. Glasses dropped. Chairs scraped. Elias Vance stumbled back from the podium, his hand clutching his chest, as if the truth were a physical blow. Victoria Vance stood utterly still, her face a mass of crumbling plaster. The empire of carefully crafted image had a fault line, and Jalen had just hammered the final wedge. He didn't shout. When he spoke again, his voice carried over the din, trembling not with fear, but with the raw power of testimony. "You wanted a dead hero to hang your charity on. You got a living witness." The fallout was instant and nuclear to BY Sunrise. The clip was a wildfire across the internet. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Jalen and hashtag Bought and Buried trended globally. The story was no longer a heartwarming donor tale. It was a scandal of fraud, coercion, and medical betrayal. The Vance Foundation's marble headquarters, once a fortress of quiet power, was besieged. Reporters camped at the doors. Protesters filled the plaza. Teachers, nurses, ordinary people holding signs that read, "We are not optics, and his life is not PR." FBI agents walked in with boxes. Board members resigned in a cascade. By week's end, subpoenas flew. The hospital CO was ousted, and two senior Vance executives were led away in handcuffs, their tailored suits looking like costumes. Through the storm, Jalen found anchors. Dr. Anya Miller, a nurse with a conscience who'd leaked the footage, stood beside him at every press conference, her presence a shield. A coalition of veterans groups, sickened by the exploitation, set up a security detail for him and his mother. Anyone who walks into the fire for a stranger, their leader, a granite-faced former Marine named Hicks, told him, doesn't walk out alone. But the reckoning he craved wasn't just in courtrooms or headlines. It was in the quiet, when a reporter shoved a microphone in his face outside the courthouse and asked, "What's the end game? What do you want from them?" Jalen looked past the lens, his eyes old. "I want them to say it out loud," he said, his voice quiet, "that it wasn't charity. It was calculation. And I want every kid who's ever been told they're disposable to know they're the main character in their own story, not an extra in someone else's." The investigation peeled back layer after rotten layer. Secret accounts for donor acquisition, bribes to fast-track private transplants, a pattern of staged miracle stories used to boost stock prices and political influence. In a federal courtroom, Victoria Vance's elegant veneer finally shattered. Under oath, asked if she authorized the operation was a success. When the news broke, a collective exhale seemed to sweep across social media. It wasn't just a medical update. It was a moral victory. The next chapter was written not by prosecutors, but by educators. A coalition of historically black universities and the veterans groups announced the Jalen Carter Legacy Scholarship, a full ride covering tuition, housing, and a living stipend. The dean who announced it said, "We invest in integrity, and if integrity had a face, it would be his." At the ceremony, Jalen didn't cry. He stood straight, accepting the embossed folder not as a reward, but as a tool. He saved his tears for later, alone at his mother's bedside as she recovered. He leaned close, her hand in his. "I'm going to finish what you started. Ma, I'm going to build it." She smiled beneath her oxygen tube. "Then build it tall, baby. Build something they can't put a price on." From poverty to purpose, from a pawn to a person, Jalen's story became proof. Not that kindness is always rewarded, but that it can never be truly extinguished. It can be buried, exploited, and stolen, but like a seed in concrete, it will find a crack and rise toward the sun. They called him naive. They said goodness is a liability. But the world forgot that the smallest, truest act can unravel the grandest lie. He gave his last $12, expecting nothing in return. And in the end, the world gave him back his mother, his future, and most importantly, his name. Because real legacy isn't a fortune. It's a name spoken with respect. It's a truth that refused to stay buried. This is LostBlack, where we tell the stories they hope remain in the dark, where the pain of prejudice is laid